Welcome to the Semaj MindSpa, where mind, spirit, and science meet. Hmm? We're on Fit FM 96.7 FM and fitfmja.com. I want to thank our founding sponsor, the Semaj MindSpa Network, JN, Jamaica National Group. We help you find a way. I also want to hail up our above or beyond consultants, taking you above where you presently are, beyond your wildest imagination. Of course, we start by always greeting our Trelawney family, and then we move along the North Coast from St. Anne, Trelawney, St. James. We'll go around, Hanover, all the way around to St. Elizabeth. And look, we cover the north and the western side of Jamaica, and then we jump on the World Wide Web, www.fitfmja.com, where we speak to the entire known universe. Huh? I'm Dr. Leahcim Semaj, and as I say, this is the Semaj MindSpa. We greet our fellow travelers. Welcome back to Semaj MindSpa Radio, where mind, spirit, and science meet. Now, I want to set the tone for what we're doing on this show. I want you to picture something with me before I say another word. A woman, 67 years old. It is 6 o'clock in the morning. She's standing at her stove, packing a lunch kit, the way she has done for years. Except this lunch kit is not for her own child. It's for her grandchild. This is not a Saturday visit. This is every single morning. She did not plan this. She did not apply for this. Nobody sat her down and asked whether she had the strength for it. Life simply arrived at her door one day and left a child behind. And she, being who she is, opened the door. Today on Semaj MindSpa Radio, we're talking about her and about the thousands like her across Jamaica and the wider Caribbean diaspora who are raising children again, not helping, not babysitting, but actually doing the job of raising children again. At 60, at 70, and sometimes beyond. We're calling this hour when the anchor leg becomes the starting line again. We're talking about the new grandparents raising children again after 60 and 70. So stay with me. It's going to be a very honest hour. Now, for decades, we were told ourselves a tidy story about what happens after 60. Remember those stories that we planned for, we talked about? The children grow up, they leave, they become their own people. The mortgage is paid, the house pay off, or close to it. The body starts to slow down, but the calendar finally opens up. And somewhere inside that opening, we are promised things. Travel, gardening, hobbies, grandparents who visit Sunday afternoon, and then mercifully go home to your mother. Time at long last to focus on ourselves after decades of focusing on everyone else. It's a good story. Most of us grew up believing some version of this. But for a growing number of people in this region, that is simply no longer the story being lived. Instead, quietly, without ceremony, almost entirely without support, something else has taken its place. The grandmother, who was supposed to spoil the children on Sunday, is now the one waking that child for school on Monday morning. The grandfather, who imagined fewer responsibilities in his latter years, has taken on the largest responsibility of his life a second time. Hmm? What do we call that? That's new reality. You know what I'm talking about, huh? I want to be precise about the language here because language is important. It's very important that we use the right language. So the way we frame it, the way we express it, hmm? We're not talking about babysitting. We're not talking about helping out. This is not stepping in during an emergency and then stepping back. This is full-time, daily, primary caregiving, undertaken by people who, by every reasonable expectation of life, believe that chapter of their life was closed. The anchor leg, that final stretch of life, meant to be run with accumulated wisdom and a lighter load, has become for many a starting line once more. Nobody asks their permission. Life rarely does. Now, is this entirely new? No. Caribbean grandparents have always minded children. Huh? It's close to a cultural inheritance in this region. Grandmothers have always kept grandchildren for a season, a summer, a school term. What has changed is the scale of it, the permanence of it, and very often the circumstance that produced it. This is no longer occasional. For many families, this is now the whole architecture of daily life. This is how it is set up. So, what are we talking about here? Huh? Grandparent, you find yourself now attending PTA meetings, helping with homework, buying school uniforms, waking up to prepare breakfast for a 7-year-old. Today, we explore this one of the fastest growing but least discussed family realities. Grandparents raising children again. Across Jamaica and throughout the world, thousands of grandparents have become primary caregivers for their grandchildren. Some stepped in voluntarily, some had no choice. Many are carrying enormous responsibilities quietly and heroically. So today we ask, why is this happening? What are the rewards? What are the costs? What is in the child's best interest? How can a society better support these families? Why is this? Now, let's start the process. Why is this happening? And why does this seem to be happening so often? No, there's no single cause. Several forces are converging at once. I want to talk you through each of them plainly because each one carries a different emotional weight. The first is economic. The cost of raising a child has simply outpaced what many young parents can absorb. Housing costs have climbed. Food costs climb. Transportation, school fees, technology, all of this has climbed. While wages for younger workers have not kept pace. A grandparent with a paid-off house or a modest pension or simply decades of experience of stretching the limited income often represents the only stable ground left standing in a family under financial strain. Right? So that's one. The money tight. The second is migration. This region knows migration intimately. Parents leave for education, for work, for the promise of something better. Children remain behind. Sometimes that arrangement is made with love. Hmm? Sometimes it is made out of duress. Without a clear communication. Sometimes it's a plan, and sometimes it works reasonably well. But sometimes it is made in haste, under pressure, and the emotional cost of the child left behind and to the grandparent left holding the child is oftentimes considerable. Migration does not simply remove a parent, it redistributes an entire childhood. Hmm? Now, there are many of us who actually experience this. But even in my case, it was the grandparents, because when my mother and father moved to the United States, I was, by then I was about 13 or so, 12. So then the other option, I was boarded with an auntie. It's a different model. Maybe some other time we discuss that model. But there's a time now when oftentimes it's younger children. Huh? So there's a category we discuss the least because it's the hardest to say out loud in polite conversation. We call this one family instability, separation, incarceration, you know what I mean? Substance abuse, untreated mental illness, domestic conflict severe enough to make a household genuinely unsafe for a child. That's another model. When a parent cannot, for whatever reason, and I want to be very careful here, because cannot is not the same thing as choose not to. But literally, when a parent cannot hold the center of a child's life, it's very often the grandparent who steps in to fill that vacancy. Not because anyone filed for it, there was no formal application, not because a court necessarily assigned it, but because a child cannot be left standing in the middle of a collapsing structure. Someone has to catch them. And too often the person who catches them is the person who already raised one generation and did not expect or was not prepared to raise another. Underneath all three of these forces sit one simple truth. Children need stability. Children need consistency. They need someone whose presence they can count on tomorrow and the day after that. When the system around the family fails economically, socially, sometimes even morally, it's very often the grandparent who becomes the dependable presence, almost by default, almost by elimination. So we're going to take a look at this, the financial reckoning nobody warns these grandparents about. And I'd like for some of you who have experienced this and have some ideas and some thoughts on this, you send me a voice note, 876-383-5627. Send a voice note so I can hear your perspective and we can incorporate it into the discussion in the future. So this is it. Now, let me tell you something about the new grandparent. Now, traditionally, grandparents' roles has changed dramatically. Today, grandparents are younger, healthier, more active, working longer, living longer. But they're taking on, again, this new role, repeat, because of what you say, the economic pressures, the migration, the family breakdown. Grandparents are the emergency response system. That's how it comes about. Now, let's start with the financial one. The economics of raising children twice. Reality check. Many grandparents expected retirement at this point. Instead, they're the one now paying school fees, transportation, food, clothing, medical expense. So what happens when you look at retirement savings now becomes school fee? You look at pension income becomes grocery money. Medical costs increase while your household expenses also rise. Are grandparents receiving enough support? Should government step in with some targeted assistance? Should absent parents be asked to contribute more? When retirement planning fails to include this kind of family reality, many people discover that they're financially unprepared for a second round of parenting. So it takes on a whole other road, but we don't talk much about it. Many grandparents had assumed that the major expense of children were behind them, but no. Sometimes, it starts off with a promise, moms, granny, you want to just keep them for a month for me, or for a term for me, but then oftentimes it extends. So retirement gets postponed. Some go back to work well past their age. They plan to stop. Saving that was meant to carry them through their own latter lives now start to get used up. So this is what I just wanted to talk about, because this is an open secret. Now, there are a number of sides to this. Number of sides. Let's start with one. The emotional reward. What do grandparents gain from this? Good place to start. Many grandparents describe their grandchildren as their greatest joy, their greatest motivation, the reason they get up every morning. You can see it in their eyes, you can hear it in their voice. Now, there's a psychological purpose. Research consistently shows that people live better when they have meaning, purpose, connection, and responsibility. And guess what? The grandchildren provide all four. Many grandparents report that the more patience they have with their grandchildren is way more than they have with their own children, because they are more emotionally mature, they're wiser, less pressure. So I'd love to hear from some grandparents who are now parenting again. Is this your reality? Send me a voice note so we can, incorporate this. But beside the emotional positive, there's a hidden emotional burden, the part that nobody talks about. Many grandparents experience exhaustion, loneliness, anxiety, financial stress, burnout. Yet they often feel guilty discussing these feelings. Common question: is it normal to feel overwhelmed? Is it normal to miss retirement? Is it normal to feel trapped sometimes? The answer is yes, Granny. Yes. Human beings can love deeply and still feel overwhelmed. There's a difference between being a grandparent and now becoming a parent again. Let's start with the psychological impact on Granny. Role confusion can create stress, resentment, fatigue, identity challenges. These are some serious things that happen to you in the anchor leg of life, that you now have to start being concerned about these things. Many grandparents raising their own children, and now with the second time around, describe something they did not expect. The The urgency of a career building has passed. The anxiety of proving themselves as a parent has softened. What remains for many is a deeper patience, yes. So they take this on now, but it's with a different kind of focus. A person with a genuine reason to rise each morning ages differently in body and mind than a person without one. A grandchild, demanding, inconvenient, exhausting as the role can be, is a good reason. It gives some grandparents reasons to be. And the bond that forms between grandparent raising a child is one of the most closest and most powerful things that happen. So we can't overlook the positive side of it, because there are two sides to this thing, and we need to understand them and make sense of it. Now, what are some of the health implications of this model? Grandchildren may help grandparents stay active, stay mentally engaged, stay socially connected, because interacting with a young child can keep you young too. But there's some potential risk. Chronic caregiving stress can contribute to hypertension, sleep difficulties, depression, anxiety, and not to mention physical exhaustion. So my question is, who is caring for the caregiver? Because grandparents are experiencing all of these negatives while they continue to give. Many grandparents give support. Few receive enough support. Some do receive some money, but oftentimes it is not enough. So they have to draw on their own resources. But keep it up with a young child, as we say, it can help to keep you young, keep you positive, but it also is draining. It also drains on you, and are you up for it? Oftentimes, this creates all kinds of issues. And I'm concerned about the issues that many grandparents go through with this. And somehow it's almost, nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that part of it, that segment, that whole issue. How are they coping? The exhaustion, the resentment that starts to build, and then the guilt that follows the resentment. The sense that one should not feel frustrated towards your beloved grandchild, followed by a swift shame for feeling it anyway. Well, let me say this plainly, because I think it needs to be said. Where people can hear it, love and fatigue are not mutually exclusive. A grandparent is permitted both, because you experience them both. So that we have to find a way now to balance this, because it has created an issue that we really did not plan for. Many grandparents are forced into this position, oftentimes because their child now has a situation that they cannot comfortably cope with. Oftentimes, the parent, when they ask the grandmother to hold, it is usually suggested it's a temporary thing. Let's take the migration one, whereby the mother goes off and the plan is to straighten herself out and to get her papers straightened out. In the interim, she sends remittance, she sends barrel, and then there's that whole issue of barrel children. And we've had an issue that in Jamaica where so many children start to do poorly in school because they're operating on the premise that Mama soon sent for me. Me soon gone. And then if the mother is able to come out periodically, when the mother comes, all kind of goodies. You have all the latest of everything. And in many cases where the parent is not able to travel for a period of time, the barrels will come. And so the child looks forward to the barrel, look forward to all the latest clothes and everything. So there's that side. Now, the good thing about now versus 20, 30 years ago, I remember, people lining up in town square at call box, trying to make that one call on a Sunday evening or to wait for that collect call at a friend's house. The wonderful thing now is that everybody have cell phone and everybody have WhatsApp. So the connection that continues or can continue between parent and child is much easier and simpler now. And oftentimes children have their own phones, even though we do a whole other program on that, So where they can have direct connection with the child almost on a daily basis. But one of the things that we have come to realize, is that children need your presence more than they need your presence. So it takes a toll. It takes a toll. And that's indeed the issue. So the grandparents gets a benefit because of the presence of that energetic young child, but it also takes a child. Raising a grandchild can supply those positive things that many grandparents need, because that grandchild is the source of real vitality. But there's a threshold. Beyond that threshold, the same forces that supply well-being begin to erode it. Chronic, unsupported caregiving stress is associated with elevated blood pressure, disrupted sleep, anxiety, depression, and the general wearing down of the body's defense over time. Now, here's a lesson that policy, and shall I say frankly, community too often ignores. The well-being of the grandchild is inseparable from the well-being of the grandparent who's caring for them. A depleted caregiver, however loving, cannot indefinitely provide the stability a child needs. Supporting these grandparents is not simply a kindness extended towards the elderly. It is, just as directly, protection extended towards the child. Now, how do we do this? How do we do this? Somehow in many communities, it is considered a given that this is how it is supposed to be. And people have always seen this because the common element, the child of the parent leaves. And sometimes after that, the parent sends the child back to live with the grandparents. I must say that I had a segment of that, because I can describe it firsthand. When I was born in Kingston, and when I was, I'm just telling you about based on report. My mother, by the way, my mother's mother died when she was born, and her father died when she was about 6 months old. So my mother grew up with her aunt. It would have been my grand aunt and grand uncle. So one interesting thing happened, and this is a common issue in Jamaica. My mother told me that when I was 9 months, my mother took me back down to the country, and this is Desire Clarendon, to stay with her aunt. So I would go there, and I would stay there until I was 5. Because that would allow her to go back to work, and I was still with family. And that I just looking back at it, I loved it. But you can understand there were lots of other young people who were similar age. So, and the community, the extended community, pitched in and all of that. When I started, it's time for school, I came back to Kingston. But, and this is a common thing for many people, as holiday came, school gave holiday on the Friday. By Friday evening, I was at West Street, jumped on the Mayflower bus, and my mother gave instructions to drop me off at Desire. The family would come and meet me at Desire, and then I would at Fairburn, and then we'd walk all the way into Desire, and we would spend the entire summer. The same thing with the Easter holidays, and the same thing with Christmas holidays. Every holiday. And for me, that was positive. Now, you can understand now, that's another segment that many Jamaicans grew up with. Country during the holidays with grandparents and extended family. But it's a little different now, because it's not just between Kingston and country, or Montego Bay and country. It is Miami, it is Toronto, it is New York. So that the gap is a little different when parents go, and the common connection, so a lot more is on the grandparents. So I'm saying that many of the grandparents now are feeling overwhelmed because they didn't plan for this. And there's a big difference between being a grandparent and becoming a parent again. There's a psychological impact. It's different because when you were becoming a parent for the first time, you planned for it, you anticipated it. But when you look at the whole issue of now parents who literally have raised their children, and the plan was now to some time for yourself, but then now having to take on this role again. So we say, yes, there's a positive side, but there's a negative side in terms of who is giving support to these grandparents, who is helping them to maintain their own life. Now, the biggest question in all of this is now, what is truly in the child's best interest? The question shouldn't be about what do the adults want. The question should always be what helps the child thrive. Children need stability. Children need structure. They need love. They need consistency. They need safety. They need emotional availability. Sometimes parents provide this. Sometimes grandparents provide this. Sometimes the healthiest discussion is a partnership, because circumstances mean that the child spends some time with parents and some time with grandparents, which has been an ongoing thing. But then the question is when it now becomes totally on the grandparents. So we have to understand what is the healthiest arrangement. What creates a healthy multi-generation family? How do we work it out so that all of these pieces fit? We talk about the anchor leg of life. We talk about the preparation that people make for moving to that segment of life. But then the question is, do we factor in now a grandparent, or should I just say someone in their 60s and 70s now taking on the complete caregiving role? That's something we have to put on the front burner, because the society owes a serious debt to this. If grandparent-led households have become the common across this region, and in many ways they have, then we can no longer treat them as an exception, requiring no institutional response. They are at this point a structural feature of how many of our families survive. That reality is called for something more than admiration from a comfortable distance. It's called for a flexible working arrangement that do not penalize older caregivers. It calls for financial support that acknowledges what these grandparents have quietly taken on. It calls for resources built specifically for people raising children a second time around. People who are decades removed from their own first attempt, often without partners, and often without any roadmap at all. It calls for counseling, community space where grief, resentment, and love can be spoken in the same breath without shame attached to them. So we have to do all of this. Underneath every policy debate, every family arrangement, every argument that happens in a kitchen at midnight sits a single question. And is this the only one that should truly govern the answer? It is, yes. What does this child need in order to thrive? That's why we're doing it. What does the child need? Not what's most convenient for the adults. Not what preserves anyone's pride. Children require safety, consistency, structure, and love delivered by someone with emotional capacity to give it. And love delivered by someone who genuinely cares about that child. Now, as we say this, we can also remind you, you will understand and recognize that there are some options that have been visibly present in Jamaica, the whole boarding school. And in fact, many of the reasons, I know of many situations where parents elected to send their child to a boarding school because of migration, because of work pressure, rather than send back to the grandparent. Because at least with the boarding school, you had quote unquote professional parents, persons who were being paid, who supposedly had the time and the energy and the knowledge to be in substitute, the house mothers who would provide that role. And I can understand that it worked very well for some. There were resentment for others. I'd love to hear from those of you who grew up under those circumstances. You know, how in boarding school, what kind of memories you have? How was it in terms of your own situation? What you took away from it? Being away from your parents. Now, I recognize there are some who literally initially resented it because it was oftentimes seen as punishment. That, you know, you're sent to, when you think of places like Monroe, and you're sent to schools, oftentimes away from the limelight, away from the urban centers. But then the child, many of these children ultimately adjusted to it and grew to love it. So that is the other option that has come about over time. So what's unfolding is that households across this region telling us something true about the character of Caribbean family. When the formal system fails economically, socially, sometimes even morally, the family absorbs the failure and keeps the child standing. It has always been this way. It is simply happening now at a scale that deserves to be seen and named rather than quietly assumed. The grandparents doing this work are not enjoying a leisurely retirement with an unexpected house guest. Many of them are carrying one of the heaviest, least visible responsibilities a family can bear. And doing so with a patience the rest of us have no right to take for granted. I wonder, you know, part of what we are experiencing in Jamaica, with the most recent figures showing us the number of children who are now going to, I want to be careful when I say it, you know, they're of high school age. They're being transitioned into high schools. But the evidence indicates that significant number of them are illiterate. can't read and write. What would be useful if we did an analysis, do a breakdown of the context under which these children are living. First of all, what proportion of children were living with grandparents? How are those children doing? Especially, well, at every level, but let's start with the lower levels of school, because the education, people talk about, many times how the work has changed and things are quite different and so on. But to have the patience to go through the homework, to make sure that it's one thing just to keep up with the lunch and the uniform and making sure you have the books and so on. But then the other part that goes into it, the daily. I used to remember my whole notion, my mother would check my books every night. And I remember a situation, whereby when I was going to primary school, I had a yellow pencil. My mother checked my bag in the morning, and I lost my pencil at school. And I was lucky enough to find a red pencil, which I used. And that evening, when my mother was checking my bag, going through my books and so on, she saw the red pencil and asked her, where did this come from? I said, well, I lost my pencil, Mama, and I found this one. My mother said, did you try to find the owner for the pencil? Did you? And I got a beating. No, I'm not encouraging this, nor am I endorsing it. I got a beating straight across what is known, well, it was called Race Course, George Smith Memorial Park. They call it Hero Circle now. All the way across Hero Circle, back to Central Branch Primary School. At 6 o'clock in the evening, my mother came from work, and my mother, every step I'd get a slap with the belt. And not raising no teeth. And not raising no teeth. And not raising no teeth. Now, that's because she checked my bag every evening. Now, how many grandparents still have the energy and the time to do things like that? What about the children who are in high school, where the work is getting a little more complicated, and oftentimes they're doing subjects? Now, it's not just reading and writing and arithmetic now. They're doing subjects that many grandparents were never exposed to. They can't even pronounce some of these things. No. Yes, grandparents can still check work. And I do remember in Jamaica, there were times when parents who could not read or write, but they checked work every evening. And the child had to turn the work in and to make sure that, your parents look at it. But again, you're understanding the pressures now on these grandparents. And then when you add, because we're looking back a generation, you did not have the distractions of social media. Back then, yes, there was television, but many rural areas didn't have. The ones that had television sign on at 6 o'clock and sign off at midnight, and there was one station for most of the time, and then eventually we had two stations. But now you have infinite number of cable channels, and you have cell phones and social media. The pressures on parenting is so much more now. And it's even rough enough for a young, quote unquote, parent to keep up. Can you imagine the pressures on a grandparent keeping up with all of this? We mentioned the positive side of it, in that, yes, some grandchildren help to keep grandparents young, doing things for them, showing them how to do things, how to set things on their phone, how to change things. But oftentimes, the grandparents have absolutely no clue. And so I'm seeing two major issues here. One, we have grandparents, even with all the best of intentions, are being asked to do more than what they were capable of doing, because they have already raised their children But now they are now actively raising, and sometimes it's not just one, it's two and three, in terms of both the pressure and the stresses on them. Do we recognize this? Grandparents doing this work are not enjoying a leisurely retirement, are not doing things for themselves for their own development. No, if you're living this right now, rising before dawn, packing a lunch kit that you did not expect to be doing so, loving a child through an exhaustion nobody warned you about, I want to hear from you. I want you to drop me out a voice note so I can incorporate this into the follow-up so we can learn. How are you coping? 876-383-5627. Drop me a voice note. Share your strategies. Share how you're dealing with it and what works for you. The seeds you are planting in this late, unplanned season may outlast you by generations, so that you are doing a yeoman's role. So that I'm happy that we have this option. And for many, the alternatives pretty much don't exist. We hear of children being left on their own. In the concept in the US called latchkey children. I mean that children, they come home from school, just let themselves in, and they whatever they have to eat and so on do until the parents come home. So there's really no direct caregiving. There's no direct person responsible for them. And the evidence has indicated that that time period between school being over and children coming home, but parents are not home yet, that's when the largest number of juvenile delinquent activities take place. But at least with a grandparent present, we are seeing the options. Now, there's also the side, where a grandparent, one come to mind is, let's say, a grandfather. Now, especially somebody who has, based on what his work has been, he's somebody who has kept pace with life and has lived a very interesting life. And now he has a lot of time on his hand, and he can take an active interest in the socialization of this young child and teaching the child things that probably even a parent would not have the time to or the capacity to do. So there is that option where, all the various activities that this grandfather engaged in as a child, he can now be teaching the child and sharing all of these kinds of things with him. So there's a positive side to it. But I want to look at it from both sides. Now, let me say something to the parents who are listening to this, because this is being broadcast far and wide. Now, you are a parent. Let's say you are a parent who, due to circumstances, it was rough for you to be able to actively provide directive parenting with your child, and so your parents were asked to step in. So granny, and sometimes grandfather, are raising the child. Now, question, I want to remind you, sometimes it's easy to, when you're away from the child, you can easily, some people can forget their responsibilities. But one, ensure that you honor your financial commitment. Because look, the reality about places like Jamaica, is only 20% of Jamaicans have any kind of pension. 20%. So the 80% don't. And the majority of Jamaicans with no pension, what they're dependent on is assistance from family, typically children. So if you are a parent who have sent your child or children back to live with grandma and grandfather, make sure that you honor your financial obligations. Because that's the least, that's step one. Make sure you do that, right? Now, the other thing which is much easier now than back then, previous generation, there's no reason why you can't talk to your child every night. WhatsApp is free. I remember many years ago, when I speak to older grandparents, what was the thing that was their motivation to become computer literate? Is that they could speak with their grandchild via the internet. And so many grandparents, literally, that was their motive. Coming out of COVID, everybody now know about Zoom and Team and the various the various platforms. So that if you are a parent away from child, there's no reason why. You may say I'm being harsh, but when I say this, there's no reason why you can't talk to your child every day, just like a child was home. He was in 15 minutes before bed. You can WhatsApp is free. The iPhone people, FaceTime, right? So you can do that. The mornings we probably kind of tight, but in the evening, I know of a situation where a parent was in the US and the child was doing exam. And what the parent did, the parent studied with the child, meaning that just by being the company, a WhatsApp call was made and the phone just put on the desk, the child, and the mother's phone was also on her desk in the US, and they just make comments to each other from time to time, as if the person was in the room with you. But the child had company. The mother was there, having company, having conversations with her. So I'm saying that this is something that we must be concerned about. Is an African proverb that said it takes a village to raise a child. But today, many villages have become just grandparents. Across Jamaica, thousands of grandparents are quietly carrying responsibilities they never expected to carry again. They're helping with homework, attending school functions, providing meals, paying bills, offering wisdom, providing stability, protecting the future. We should celebrate them, but we should also support them, because the well-being of children depends heavily on the well-being of the caregiver. And perhaps one of the greatest gifts a grandparent can offer is not merely love, but the example of resilience, sacrifice, responsibility, and hope. So to all the grandparents raising children again, the journey may not be what you planned, but your impact may echo for generations. Remember, the best is yet to come, and we thank you very much. Now, if you're a grandparent raising a child today, what support do you most need from family, from community, from the government? Send me a voice note, or send me an email, semaj@semajmindspa.com. Semaj@semajmindspa.com. All right? So stay strong, walk good, and take care till we talk again.